All right, let's start this again.
All right.
Act surprised.
Yes, welcome to this special edition of Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at news, events, and political happenings through a generational lens. And today we're doing a live broadcast of the podcast. So we can say this episode has been recorded before a live studio audience.
Yay.
I've always wanted to say that. So there you go.
An applause track. I love it. We should do this all.
So
every
we are
time.
going to be talking today about the invasion of Ukraine, its impact both on Ukraine as well as on the rest of the globe. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Stacy is our resident international affairs expert, having published, I believe, 6 books now.
Working on the 7th.
On various aspects of international relations. And so she's going to, and she has spent time actually in Ukraine conducting research. So we're going to hear from that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic side of things, the sanctions that have been placed on Russia and the impact of those. So we're going to get going, and we're going to start with Dr. Stacy. Since you had been to Ukraine, why don't you tell us just a little bit about that, what you were doing, and what you learned about the country while you were there?
Sure. So I was in Ukraine during 2010, 2011, so over the kind of Christmas, New Year's Eve area or time period. I did my master's thesis on the Orange Revolution, or one of my case studies was the Orange Revolution that occurred in Ukraine in 2004, and this was a huge democratic movement over electoral fraud, right? The Russian-backed candidate was very much elected fraudulently, right? Putin even went so far, the regime went so far, Russia, to poison the Democratic candidate, Yushchenko, who eventually did become president. And so I went to kind of interview folks 6 years after, obviously, the Orange Revolution occurred, and not knowing, unwittingly, right, 4 years before the actual invasion of Russia occurred in 2014. So I got to speak to folks. We set up interviews in Kiev at different universities with the women's group, or Optimist group is what they were called. Very cool women. So I got a lot of really great interviews from the Central West region. I was telling Nicole, one of our audience members, that really the central and western parts of Ukraine are extremely European, right? You've got Burberry, Chanel, everything you would expect from a European capital. But as we took our train ride overnight from Kiev to Dnipropetrovsk on a still coal shovel train with 2 very questionable Russian men standing outside the cabin overnight for 8 hours, you realize very quickly that you are in a different world when you hit the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine. They're still very much adherent to Russian. They speak Russian Orthodox religion. You can see it in just the mentality of the folks there. So just kind of two different countries, and you're the folks that have been on the ground in Ukraine, you hear that from folks that have actually visited the country. It is just the dichotomy is incredible. But the people are lovely. The politics obviously makes one like me salivate. So.
Well, I want to start off. We're going to talk about the invasion.
Sure.
And I think it's always useful to remind, especially students, but others, this wasn't a situation where Vladimir Putin just woke up one morning and said, I think I'll go there, right? This kind of event is something that is really decades in the making, right? There's lots of stuff that happened for a long period of time that gets us to this point. Absolutely. And so I'm hoping you'll do a little bit of kind of recap about what was it that got us to this point, and then what's happened since.
So, yeah, Vladimir Putin has been in power for, this is a 20-year scheme. Really since, we can call it a 30-year scheme. He, very lovingly refers to the fall of the Soviet Union as one of the great geopolitical catastrophes of the 20th century. And so this has been a long-term plan for Putin to piece back together what he believes is rightfully Russia, or rightfully the Soviet Union. So I want to kind of just begin with Hi, it's day 15. Hi, we're in day 15 of this. And if you've been following the news, we had a leak last week that this was actually the day it was supposed to be over, according to Russian military officials. It was supposed to be quick and dirty, and they were supposed to take Kiev in 15 days. But that has obviously not transpired. It was reported last night from CBS. So U.S. officials estimate that roughly Russians have lost roughly 5,000 to 6,000 people in the first 2 weeks of battle. Military standard means that you need to multiply that by 3. So the estimates are really around probably 15 to 18,000 Russian soldiers that have been lost in just this 2 weeks. So as Professor Davenport was stating, this is, again, a very long-term plan on the part of Vladimir Putin, and largely, the presidencies since the fall of the USSR have been very oriented on maintaining Soviet and Russian sphere of influence, right? So, what Putin wants, generally speaking, is number one, to stave off democracy. And so you saw this in Georgia in 2008, not, Georgia on my mind, but the country, right? Not Atlanta, the country of Georgia in 2008. And this is very, very similar to what happened in both 2014 and now in Ukraine. In 2008, they recognized 2 separatist regions, Russian-speaking, Russian-oriented regions of Georgia, as I cannot say this right. We'll put it in the map. And then South Ossetia. So both of these have been recognized as independent pieces of Georgia, as well as, obviously, you guys know, in 2014, Crimea was annexed, which I won't get on my soapbox about this, but the annexation of Crimea and the invasion, generally speaking, in 2014, was an attempt to maintain that sphere of influence within Ukraine. The sitting president at the time, who was the Russian-backed candidate back from 2004, Yanukovych, he came into power in 2010, he had moved back towards Russian influence, right? That was the time where 2010 to 2014 was a time when Ukraine was really trying to balance itself. It was moving, obviously, more towards the West. It had written into its constitution that joining NATO was one of its, what it wants to do. It's one of its future goals. And that scared Vladimir Putin quite a bit. And so, the annexation and the initial invasion in 2014, that was, again, largely about making sure that Putin kept that sphere within his reach. So, moving forward, and just, again, generally speaking, if you would do picture number 1, my lovely unpaid Davenport, right? So we, again, want to return. Putin is looking for a return to and Western acknowledgement of the USSR, the Russian sphere of influence. So the core, truly, of the Putin doctrine is getting the West to treat Russia as if the USSR was never dissolved, right? It should be a powerful political actor. It needs to be revered, feared, and respected. So Putin has been, systematically working against democracy within his reach. So I want to show you guys, and I know this one's a little bit grainy, but right here is the area known as Transnistria. And this is another separatist region. This one is of Moldova, or in Moldova, I'm sorry, Russian-speaking. And so if you'll go to map number 2, keep this in mind here. This is New Russia, right? This is what Putin is calling New Russia. And so it would extend, let me Vanna wipe myself over here, from Luhansk, Donetsk, right? These are the 2 regions that have already been taken. Crimea already been taken. Kherson is where things are going down today, still very highly contested, all the way, right? We already have this part, so we're going, so this is the New Russia. And so really what Putin needs to do is take Kherson right here, and Mykolaiv, and then Dnipropetrovsk. And that's what our goal is. Not our goal, Putin's goal. And I think, remember this when we come back to, my diagnosis of how this is going to end, because this is really the main goal, right? The idea to bring back together a united Russian-speaking, Russian-oriented republic, right? With Putin as the, premier, if you will. So, we like maps a lot, sorry kids. So, you've heard a lot, kind of differing opinions from pundits and different experts at this time, arguing back and forth about whether the invasion was about NATO expansion or other things. And I am of the mindset that certainly, right, NATO expansion is hugely important to Putin. He does not want, clearly, Western military forces on his borders. But I think, looking more long term at the actions of Putin, even when back in 2002, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia joined NATO and the military expanded into those nations, Putin didn't fight that. In fact, he very, very oddly said, I can't stop these countries. They're independent countries. I can't stop them from joining this military alliance. So I'm not sold on the fact that this is just about NATO. In fact, I'm more sold on the fact that this is about democracy. Right, this is about Vladimir Putin needing to keep this authoritarian communist bloc together, and it terrifies him that Ukraine, being on its border, a functioning capitalist democracy on his border. Right, that's truly the fear of Putin, and the borders are porous. Right, so whenever I was there, I mentioned it was a holiday season. There were probably more Russians walking around Kiev than there were Ukrainians, and so that's a dangerous thing for Vladimir Putin to have his people going back and forth, recognizing democracy, right? It's the reason why North Korea shuts people off, right? You cannot leave because you might get that whiff of democracy. You might get that spirit of democracy. So I think it is much more about democracy than a lot of folks are talking about today. But the immediate demands, the things that Putin has absolutely said that he wants and that he's using as justification. Again, he wants a commitment of neutrality for the countries, the post-Soviet or satellite states, as well as Sweden, Finland, obviously Ukraine. So no joining or siding with the European Union or siding with NATO or joining NATO. He also wants a return to 1997 NATO levels. So this would obviously push things back to the pre-2002 Eastern European expansion. So this would largely entail Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia removing NATO troops from their borders, which, again, you've got sovereign nations to consider here. He also wants veto power. I think this one is really interesting. Over the foreign policy decisions of non-NATO members and neighbors, right? So not only is he interested in keeping them out of NATO, but he's extremely interested in making sure that he knows and can dictate what their foreign policy, thus military policy is. But again, the democracy, I think, a democracy based around a capitalist market economy, I think that is the truly terrifying thing for Vladimir Putin right now. We don't want the people to catch that democratic contagion, man.
It spreads.
It's scary. It's very scary.
System, it spreads.
So Nicole had a question before. I'm sorry, I keep using you, but you're my face, man. She was kind of leading me into this conversation and having it before the recordings were on. She asked me about war crimes, and it's really hard. Yesterday was an extremely hard day, I think, probably for all of us who were paying attention. You do have the ICC, the International Courts, Criminal Courts, open up an investigation. So they're starting to keep a list of the ongoing war crimes, the things that are illegal or against the Geneva Convention. So clearly, yesterday, in the obliterating of and targeting of that children's hospital, right? The pictures are absolutely horrific. God, I can't imagine. Labor was hard enough in a cushy bed in Oklahoma. I can't imagine being, carried out in the middle of war. The crater is crazy. If you haven't seen it, look it up. Right now, there are 18 dead, but they're still sifting through that debris. So, unfortunately, that will be something more to add to that list. But in terms of basic Geneva Convention protocol, attacking civilians is a no-no. It is the number one thing. You cannot attack civilians. You must protect them. You cannot use them as targets. So obviously, number one, You can just check that off. Number 2, combatants must be distinguishable from civilians. We continue to hear and have heard, really since 2014, about the embedding of Russian soldiers in plain clothes, right? Or mercenaries, right? Who are walking around these various Ukrainian cities. They don't know who they are. They cannot distinguish. There's no insignia to tell folks that they're part of the military. Civil infrastructure, right? So the things that make daily life possible for people. Hospitals, right? Number 1. But schools, right? Schools, churches, homes, right? Apartment complexes, power plants. I think we're just now starting to realize that Russia's scary, kids. Any country that would use Chernobyl as a political tool, as a military tool, that's terrifying. And we continue to hear daily about what's going on in Chernobyl and the possibility of nuclear radiation. Water treatment plants, right? These things should not be targeted. Daily life should not be disrupted, is what the Geneva Conventions say. And then finally, illegal weapons. And I think that, of everything, Russia has certainly been guilty of using illegal weapons, the vacuum bombs, the I can't remember the last part of that, but they are like heat-seeking, basically, missiles, right there. They are attracted to the complexes, things like that, and people, right? These things are not allowed in standard warfare, conventional warfare, and that is, I think, where most folks are just wholly shocked, and should be wholly shocked whenever they are getting and able to receive news and information that is factual. You're seeing these protests on the streets of Russia, but then you also have a very systematic push to censor everything, right? Which, do you want to introduce this, or do you want me to continue ranting?
Go ahead. You're on a roll.
I'll continue my soapbox, my friend.
Yeah.
So that moves me into the second part of what I wanted to focus on, Western relations in the media. And so this feeds into his piece, so he'll talk soon, I promise. But initially, the Western media was really shell-shocked. You had, pundits, you had, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley even going on news shows, Sunday news shows, saying, "Oh no, right? Russia they're not going to invade. They don't want any of this." And here we are, right? So initially, the Western media didn't really know how to take this, and when you saw the invasion in the first week, you were seeing it 24/7, right? You CNN, MSNBC, all of your cable news channels were just broadcasting pictures of Kiev or pictures of, these cities. There was also a very inopportune moment for Western capitalism during one of these broadcasts. I don't know if you watch John Oliver, but you should. During the CNN's coverage, right, complete silence, gray, right, we're watching, this city that's just stalled, and it breaks into the very loud country music Applebee's commercial. So if it was just like a token moment for Western capitalism. Sorry, I have to. It's a good time. So anyway, you have a massive pullout, right? So once we get our heads on straight in the West, you start to have this mass exodus of companies, right? Of broadcasting companies, the BBC, CNN. And again, like I said, Putin and the Duma, the parliament, passed a law criminalizing the spread of what they are deeming fake information. And this includes any information about military operations. And these are punishable. This fake information, the spread of fake information is punishable now in Russia by up to 15 years in prison. So like I said, you have had the last independent Russian alternative news channel that was broadcasting actual facts shut down earlier this week, Rain TV. So now, it's bits and pieces. It's, VPN. It's where we can get access to the internet and to get information that is outside of Russia. You also have some moves by tech companies, right? Google Europe, for example, blocked YouTube channels connected to Russia Today, as well as Sputnik across Europe. Facebook, Twitter, even the Chinese-owned TikTok have scuttled operations in Russia. Yeah, I was really shocked by that one too, especially because, TikTok is a national security threat, even, bygones, but they scuttled their operations there. The funny thing about this. Earlier this week, it was reported, even though they scrapped TikTok, Chinese journalists are being embedded in with the Russian military. Yeah, I love that face. Yeah, they're being embedded with the Russian military, and they are actually following them into the heavily contested Mariupol, where we saw the children's hospital being bombed yesterday. And then from the digital side of things, although we know Russia, Cozy Bear, and all that fun stuff, they are great at the hacking stuff, very, very adept. Ukraine has certainly put up a fight in this information hybrid warfare that we are seeing today. So Pravda is one of the major Ukrainian newspapers. It leaked 120,000 Russian soldiers' personal data who are fighting in Ukraine, right? So we are, you're seeing Ukrainians really fight back tooth and nail with whatever they have access to fight back with, and that was quite a devastating leak for Russia. Clearly, you don't want your military information out there. And then finally, and we'll get to Professor Davenport's economic report. Note how he gets to do the money. We don't do that. Reported by Forbes. This is crazy interesting and tells us where we are in the 21st century of warfare. So reported by their editor-in-chief of Forbes Ukraine last night, certain delivery apps, I think your Uber Eats, right, are synced with the air raid alert system. Right? So he tweeted out last night that when an alert is on, all orders are automatically halted and people are being automatically reimbursed for their food because the delivery is obviously not going to come because they got to shut it, right? This just is a crazy state of hybrid warfare that we're in where we can just get our money back automatically because there's a bomb coming.
And that's
Wild.
probably a really good... they probably will learn quicker from that than from maybe the air raid sirens and such, right?
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
If my chicken's not showing up, I'm going to be upset. Just saying. So give us the economic report. I want to hear
All right,
about the sanctions.
So what has NATO, the NATO alliance, other Western countries, what has been their response to this? Well, let's talk about what it hasn't been first. That's pretty easy. There has been no direct military engagement, right? And the NATO, especially other Western allies, are going to do everything they can to not do anything that can even be interpreted as direct military assistance or engagement. And we saw this just recently. Poland wanted to deliver some fighter jets to an American base so the Americans could move those into Ukraine, and the U.S. was like, no. Let's talk about this.
Because they posted it on a website first. They did not contact us.
They didn't, to be fair,
Yeah.
Poland didn't exactly give anybody a heads up that these planes were going to be delivered, right?
It's not quite international protocol.
And Poland is a member of NATO, right? And so that kind of assistance could be interpreted as NATO aggression. It certainly would be by Putin, as NATO aggression against Russia. And so we're going to do everything that we can not to do that. Now, is NATO supplying certain types of weapons into Ukraine? Yes, at least currently they are. Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft, anti-tank missiles, and weaponry, that is going in. But you will not see U.S. or other European troops in Ukraine. You will not see U.S. jets right now. The president of Ukraine has been pleading for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That's not going to happen either because what everybody's concerned about, and what, quite frankly, Putin is taking advantage of, is nobody wants into a direct confrontation with a country that has a nuclear bomb, and many of them, and you don't know how willing they are going to be to use them.
He's pretty willing.
And so that type of assistance is not going to come to Ukraine. If Ukraine is going to hold out and win this, they're largely on their own, right? At least from that military side. Now, the West has taken advantage of some tools that have emerged over the last few decades with the growth of what we would call the global and integrated economy, all right?
Globalization.
In which they have done some things to damage Russia economically. One of these is the removal of Russian banks from the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, or SWIFT for short. Basically, this is a system that links financial institutions across more than 200 countries. It helps ensure swift and efficient payments and receipt of payments, right? And so by Russian banks being opted out of that, for them to receive payments for anything becomes much more complicated in the process. They also froze the foreign assets of the Russian central bank, which means it's going to be very hard for it to convert, things into movable currency, right? Liquid currency where they can spend cash and access that cash abroad. There has been a reduction of exports to Russia in a variety of areas. And they have targeted prominent Russian politicians and business people, including Putin himself, for the freezing of their foreign assets also.
Not my yacht.
In fact, there was a story I saw just the other day that there's a little town in Italy that has this gigantic yacht, and there are suspicions that it might be actually Putin's. I don't know the veracity of that, but that goes to show that they are targeting not just the country at large, but individuals who they believe have close ties to the regime, who are in the regime, or who are supportive of it.
Which I think is really important. Let me interject here as the comparative theorist, right? Because whenever we put sanctions, as you pointed out, we are a global market economy. This is about globalization. So when we put sanctions on countries, they not only impact us, but by and large, those sanctions are hurting the people on the ground, not the people at the top.
You're stealing my thunder.
I know. I'm sorry. All right. I'll be good.
Yes. A couple other things, because these happened in the last last few days. That I want to mention. So Germany has said that they're placing a hold on the development of a second Nord Stream pipeline, which was to run gas, oil from Russia to Germany. And Russia has said that one of its things that said we're going to pay you guys back is we may just stop the flow of oil through the pipeline we already have, right? President Biden earlier this week announced that the U.S. is no longer going to be importing Russian oil. So about 8% of our oil imports were from Russia. Just by way of contrast, most of our oil imports come from Canada, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia. Interestingly enough, mentioning Saudi Arabia, they, along with the UAE, have kind of rebuffed efforts by the Biden administration to get them to pump more oil that we can replace the Russian oil with. So that, as you're seeing play out, is causing gas prices to go up considerably. Biden has resisted calls by some to remove some of the restrictions to domestic production so far. Whether or not he'll maintain that position and how long he will is anybody's guess, but at least right now they've opted not to go that route. And then to know, okay, what does that do to Russia? Well, 40% of Russia's annual revenue comes from their oil sales, all right, from their oil exports. So that is going to be a hit as these others. And Dr. Stacy was right that part of the issue here is that not only are we targeting and impacting kind of the upper elite of Russia, but the average person on the ground is going to feel the full brunt of this, perhaps even more than those wealthy oligarchs or the high-ranking government officials, because they have some insulation from some of this. The average Russian is not. And I'm going to go ahead and have you pull up a couple of slides. I should have started off with these. But just to give you an idea of the relevance. So this is a chart. This is from Investopedia. This is the top 10 countries by GDP. So GDP is simply how much is all the stuff that your country produce worth, okay? These are the top 10 countries. The United States comes in at number 1. Russia doesn't make the list, right? It's just outside. Russia is number 11 on this list, okay? So if you go to that next slide, and you'll see that the full list of 25. So you can see Russia is at number 11 here, right? Considerably below most of the countries that are enacting these sanctions, right? And so while Russia may have a military advantage against Ukraine on the ground, they are at a decided disadvantage when it comes to this type of economic warfare that we are now seeing play out. Let's go to the next slide. The third slide here is let's looking at countries not by GDP, because GDP can give you a kind of a distorted view of what's going on within a country. So this looks at countries by GDP per capita, or what we sometimes call per capita income. And this is you don't have all 50 on here. It's a list of 50 of the top ranking countries by per capita income. And Russia does not even make the list in that top 50. What that tells you is, while Russia has a relatively sizable gross domestic product, it produces stuff, its people aren't wealthy, right? And so that goes to the point that Dr. Stacy and I have been making, that a lot of those people are going to be feeling this brunt much more heavily than some of these folks that we think we're targeting. And that has been called, some have called, because of that, maybe we should be a little bit more cautious about the types of economic sanctions we impose on the country. So, in addition to all of the stuff that governments are doing, as Dr. Stacy alluded to, you're now seeing private entities also enacting their own sanctions, if you will, right? Disney and Warner Brothers have said they're not releasing any new productions into Russia. Expedia has stopped its sales of travel services in Russia. Adidas are closing their stores and have ended their partnership with the Russian soccer organization. And in fact, the international soccer organization, FIFA, has basically suspended the ability of Russian teams to play in those international soccer tournaments, including the 2022 World Cup. ExxonMobil and British Petroleum have both said they are ceasing operations and will not invest in any new development of oil resources in the country of Russia. Even McDonald's has got in on the game, closing its, it has, last I saw, 850 stores in Russia, with, I think the number was somewhere around 60,000 total employees, and they are shutting those stores down. Now, what they did say also is they're going to continue to pay those employees. So this is at least one business that's recognizing that these folks, you know, folks that work at McDonald's in Russia are not a lot different than folks that work at McDonald's in the United States on that side. They're not at the upper end of the income spectrum, and recognizing the harm that just not paying them would cause. You've had companies like Harley-Davidson, General Motors, Apple, the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, all pulling out, including PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, ceasing operations. So if you have an American Express card and you're in Russia, it no longer works, right? And Netflix, as well as many other names that you would recognize, like Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Heineken, interestingly enough. So all of these companies have said, we're not going to conduct business in Russia. I'm sure not all of these are doing what McDonald's did and paying their employees. So this is where you're going to see some real hurt and harm to average Russians who have no responsibility per se for this attack and for what their leader does, but who are certainly going to be paying the price for it.
I actually saw on Twitter right before we came in that Putin is going to nationalize some of these abandoned, like Coca-Cola, the existing infrastructure, et cetera. So yeah, we're moving into some high Soviet times.
Attempting to maintain that. Good luck with that. It didn't work out real well the last time they did that, but who knows? So. But one of the points I really want to emphasize is this is one of the advantages of this kind of globally integrated economy is we now have tools to use against bad actors internationally that can be quite painful to them. And we didn't have when Hitler was charging through Europe, we didn't have these kinds of tools, at least not to the extent that we have today. To use against them. Now, there is a criticism. There's a couple of things to understand about economic sanctions. Number one, they take longer to take effect
Yeah.
than do the boots on the ground, so to speak, right? And this is kind of the competition that's going on right now internationally. Is Russia's hoping that they can seize Ukraine, make it a fait accompli, and just make the West deal with it, right? The West is hoping that Ukraine can hold out long enough that these sanctions take full effect, and Russia has to find a way to get out of here without losing total face in doing so, right? And who's going to win that game?
Nobody.
I can't tell you. Nobody's going to win it in the big picture, right? So this is kind of the thing that's going on right now, and the balancing act that everybody's trying to play. China is out there kind of observing, watching. Apparently, they had some coordination with Russia on the timing of the attack, right? They were like, we don't mind if you do it, but can you wait till the Olympics are over, right? So you don't interfere. So, and China, I read a report yesterday. China is a little frustrated with the lack of pace that this invasion has had. And Russia has been surprised, I think, by the lack of progress that they've been able to make over 2 weeks. But make no mistake, China's watching this for one particular reason. How will the West react here, and what would that mean if we decide to go into Taiwan? Right?
Yeah. You're hearing a lot of this, and I want to make sure, again, as a comparative theorist, that we don't conflate the two. Russia, again, 8%. We get 8% of our oil from them. Other imports, I imagine, is probably around the same rate. China is our number one trading partner. Sanctioning Russia to death is a whole lot easier than sanctioning Russia is going to be to this degree. So I want us to be real careful about the implications of what's happening in Ukraine on what could possibly happen in Taiwan, because they are two separate countries.
It is. I will point out, if you look at this list, now this is GDP per capita, right? Per capita income. Right. You don't see China on that list either, right? Now, they are.
You see Taiwan?
You do see Taiwan, that's right. You do see China as the second largest total economy. So if we just went back and looked at GDP, right? And that's what Dr. Stacy's talking about. They have become the world's producer of basically consumer goods, right? And while there has been a trend in the last 5 years or so of companies starting to look elsewhere, that trend has not accelerated at a pace that enacting these kind of sanctions wouldn't mean a great deal of discomfort for us as well, right? We're dealing with the rising gas prices, and I don't want to be real cavalier about that, right?
No,
a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people say, well, you can just stop driving so much, and you can do. Not everybody is in that kind of position,
right?
And for a lot of people, doubling your gas budget means less food and clothing for their children, means less education that they can acquire. It means less health care that they can access, right? And so we shouldn't be cavalier about how these prices are affecting people, even if, in the short term at least, there's not a lot we can do about it, right? And so I think that's something that we need to put in mind as well, is yes, these are going to have an impact on real live Americans as well as those in Russia. We need to be honest about that and not be overly, like I said, cavalier and just, well, that's just the way it is. Sorry, I don't think that's helpful in the long run for our politics either.
No. Public image not good on that one. So what's happened since the invasion on a global scale, clearly where I live? So since the invasion, as Professor Davenport just completely summarized perfectly, the Russian economy has been downgraded to junk. It has become the most sanctioned nation in the world, surpassing Iran in 2 weeks. Right? That's huge. Germany Hi, kids. Hi, kids who don't follow history. Germany has doubled its military budget and defense spending and has pledged to do so in future years. This marks 75 years of post-World War II policy on militarization. Finland, Sweden, Serbia, and other nations firmly now aligned with the West, where beforehand they could have taken us or left us. And seeking NATO, and some are seeking European Union membership along with Ukraine. Switzerland, children. Switzerland, you know the old joke, like neutral, right? I'm Switzerland. Switzerland's no longer neutral, right? This breaks a 200-year policy of neutrality by the Swiss. They are freezing Russian assets. It's crazy. The European Union, once reluctant on military policy, really still hasn't fully coalesced a cogent military policy for its member nations, sent European Union funded fighter jets to Ukraine. These are some huge implications. Nord Stream 2, as Professor Davenport said, canceled, triggering an introspective moment for a lot of these European countries and their dependency on Russian oil and gas. The United Kingdom was the only other country thus far, and I would imagine, period, that have joined our ban on Russian oil and gas imports, and it's because they can.
Right, and they gave themselves the entire year to get that down, right?
They did too. Yes. There's that.
And why is this challenging? Why can the U.S. say, we're not going to take any more Russian oil, but Western Europe not? Because Western Europe gets 40% of its energy from Russian oil, right?
Yeah.
And so cutting that off, it would be extremely problematic for them. And so you kind of see the tight spot that they've gotten themselves into, right? That they don't have all of the levers that we are fortunate as the U.S. has to pull without it inflicting real serious pain on their populations in their own countries.
I can't imagine what the cost of gas is in Germany right now. I can't imagine. The European Union, again, is considering Ukraine a candidate nation. This is something that, again, is a thumb right in the eye of Putin. Russia now shut out of most European airspace. I'm sure he did not anticipate that. You also have some other implications in terms of the economy. If you can go to my map, number 3, or that. So I want to talk about, this is the General Assembly vote. And so there's a lot to explain here. You've got 35 countries total that have abstained. Obviously Russia voting against, Syria voting against, very heavy, Korea, North Korea, Belarus, Eritrea, pretty good allies. Eritrea is kind of random there, but the others, pretty close allies. The 35 abstentions are extraordinarily interesting, I think, because of all of the African countries that decided to just say, okay, cool, we're gonna back out of this. So if you'll go to my next, the resolution was condemning the invasion of Ukraine, right? So, pretty basic. Don't do this. So this explains a lot of this, right? This is the Russian military presence in Africa. So the percentage of arms that is imported from Russia. And now you start to get a good picture of why some of these nations are voting or not, right? Or abstaining. Another pretty big vote for the Russian invasion, Brazil. Bolsonaro, another authoritarian dictator in Brazil, gets a lot of arms from Russia. But again, this is a really good picture of exactly the tentacles that Russia has in the continent of Africa that I don't know that a lot of Americans realize, and that absolutely impacts geopolitics and what these countries are doing. You also have a lot of trouble that is on the horizon, friends. Trouble with the African and Middle Eastern countries. I love that you get my jokes. So Ukraine and Russia together supply 34% of the world's wheat, and 16%, Ukraine supplies 16% of the global corn exports. Global corn exports, right? Making this invasion and war increasingly costly for the entire community, but especially for places like Africa, places like the Middle East that already have issues with food prices, with crops, etc. So to give you an example, the price of food is up 80% overall in Egypt. Wheat prices are up 50%, the highest level in 14 years, and the price of bread in Egypt was raised for the first time since 1980. This is revolution stuff. Since 1980. And again, if you are talking about Egypt, they've had two domestic political revolutions in that time and still didn't raise the price of food. It's incredible. Yemen, proxy war going on, right? Between Saudi Arabia and Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. Already a famine going on because those rebels will not allow international aid, humanitarian aid, including food, to reach the citizens. Yemen, 27% of its wheat comes from Ukraine, 18% from Russia. No doubt going to further their starvation in this war-torn country. So again, we're just 2 weeks into this, and we're already starting to see the reverberations around the global community. This is not just contained to Russia and Ukraine. They are they're called the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. They have fertile soil. That's why it's been attacked so many times over its history. It's incredible to think about how people are going to make it, much longer without there being some folks on the streets in some of these cities, right? You also have the winners and losers. I want to talk just briefly because, of course, Professor Davenport just mentioned China, and I kind of got my 2 cents in there. But man, China is certainly winning a lot of this in terms of PR, in terms of what can happen and what is happening next, including the increased dependency of Russia on China in the region. China getting to act as the global mediator, right, between the Ukraine, Russia, and the Western nations. And then a weakened Russia, right, a weakened Putin is much easier for the Chinese to control. Xi Jinping is no joke. He is legit, and he will use this as an advantageous moment for him to get in there and to increase his influence and create this new Soviet bloc in China's name, right? You also have Venezuela. You missed Venezuela. Venezuela, man, they are going to be a huge winner in this as well. If you do not recall the politics of Venezuela in the last few years, they've had a contested presidential election. In the last administration, we backed the opposition candidate, Guaido. Maduro never left office, so Maduro, still president. Biden and the team went down earlier this week to hopefully, right, fill in that void of oil that we now have, that 8% we're now missing from Russia. We want to get back in with Venezuela because one of the things that the Trump administration did was to cut us off from Venezuelan oil, right? So we are now renegotiating with some pretty bad actors in order to kind of stick it to Russia. So maybe not the best calculation for the United States, but it is kind of what we can do at this point to ease at least some of the suffering on the actual ground here for our folks. So those two are for sure the big kind of winners. And Maduro, I should mention, is a strong Putin advocate. He is, waving the flag over there in Biden's face. But Maduro doesn't care, right? Whoever's paying him for oil, that's super. There's no loyalty to the United States there. So don't get it twisted. When we go back to Venezuela, it's not going to be because we're friends. It's going to be because we need them and we're going to pay them. So yeah. Scary stuff. So how does it end? I'll let you go first.
That's the million-dollar question.
How does it end, Davenport?
How does this play out? And I'm going to go back to that scenario, right? Russia's banking on they can grab Ukraine quickly enough that these economic sanctions will not have time to fully take an effect, and they can survive those and then make the West just accept what they've done, right? The West is hoping that doesn't occur. Who's going to win that bet? Your guess is as good as mine. I can't tell you. I think right now, there's a lot of positivity in how well Ukraine has fought back. As Dr. Stacy said, the idea in Russia was this would be over in 2 weeks, and we've done our deed, and that certainly has not happened. Should something go awry in one of these nuclear plants in Ukraine, that could complicate things as well. And the question that I've talked to Dr. Stacy a couple of times about is, at what point does the West call Putin's bluff?
Yeah.
At what point do they say, yeah, you're talking a big game, we're going to call you on that? And then what happens in that situation?
That's a deep sigh moment.
Right. I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
I tend to be optimistic in the long run, but in the short run, things are going to get really ugly, and that's just the way things are right now.
We love his idealism. I am realpolitik, very, very not optimistic. So, number one, the war is unwinnable for Putin. Period. End of story. What is up for grabs now, or what it is now, is a matter of what concessions he's willing to make and take without looking like a loser. Really, this is about saving face. And so, if you'll go back to number two, go back to New Russia. It really, to me, feels like the indefinite occupation of this eastern flank is inevitable. I think that this is probably the most amenable solution that Putin will take, and that the United States, what are we going to do? We're not really all that interested in fighting for Moldova. So I think that this is the easiest way that Putin can say, oh, I made these gains. Kiev is, it's not, I don't think it's going to happen. The city itself is so... Oh, it's circular and extremely difficult to navigate. That's why they're having so much trouble as it is. And they're going to have to take it street by street if that's what they're going to try to do. So I just think that, the invasion, the regime change of Kiev is something that, Putin would love to do, but I don't think that he's going to be able to do it. And I think he's realizing that right now. And so, hey, what can I get out of this? So again, I don't think that Ukraine comes back into the fold of Russia, period. Whether there is regime change or not, I think that Ukraine moves more towards the West, becomes a member of at least one of the organizations. I'll momentarily talk about that. But I think that Ukraine is solely now in the box of the Western world. Again, I don't think, just knowing these two organizations, I don't think that it is feasible that Ukraine will be accepted to both the European Union and NATO, period. I think it is much, much more likely that they will continue to be, or either stay in candidate status in the European Union or be accepted on a provisional or kind of tentative basis. But NATO feels a whole lot less likely. There's not a whole lot that they're bringing to the table in terms of NATO other than sticking a thumb in Putin's eye. And the regime change, Russia. Let's talk about Russia. And I know some people on the internet land, and maybe sitting in this room, might think I'm on some drugs. But I really feel like regime change, if there was ever a time that regime change were possible in Russia, it's now. You are seeing kids, literally your age, that are going to fight. They're being handed guns and shipped off to Ukraine, have no idea what it is they're fighting for, have no idea what it is to live under the Soviet Union, have no clue what it is that they are doing when they're going to kill their brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And again, you're seeing this spill out onto the streets. The youth, they're not going to take, these kids, again, they are living in now an economy, a Soviet economy going back to 1991 with job prospects, college education, all of these things are just a recipe for a revolution. I think it's a powder keg. I think that Moscow, St. Petersburg, I think that Russia right now is a powder keg. And as you continue to pick off those oligarchs, those folks in the Kremlin, in the Communist Party, it becomes difficult for Putin to really keep his inner circle together. There are huge implications, obviously, for Russia, and this is, and Putin's really his legitimacy to govern. That's what's up. That's what's the question at this point. Is he still a legitimate ruler? Does he have the consent of the governor, right? they're not a democracy, but still you need at least some people in your population to support you. This feels to me a lot like Egypt in 2011. And again, I'm going to get nerdy on you because this is, again, another case study for my dissertation. But what happened in the Egyptian Arab Spring, right at the end of it, was the military was given orders by Mubarak to shoot the protesters, right? Go out in the streets, go out in these tanks, shoot these protesters, get them out of Tahrir Square. Let's get this over with. The military at that point realized that Mubarak was done. There was no more legitimacy to rule, period. So the military made a very, very good decision, and instead of shooting the protesters, they backed the protesters and remained a legitimate component of that government. And now you have, right after a mild military coup, the sitting president is part of Mubarak's old military regime. This feels very much like that moment. Does Putin's military support him enough? Is there enough dissension in those ranks? And right now, they've been conscripting, and this is something I didn't know before this invasion. So they've had mandatory service, and this has kind of gone back and forth over different presidents, but largely for the last 20 years, 18 to 27-year-old men must serve at least 2 years in the Russian military. So at any point in time, they've got roughly 500,000 dudes raring to go. And again, a lot of those folks, all of those folks now, 18 to 27, that's millennial and younger, they have no idea what it is to live under the Soviet Union. They have no idea what it is they're fighting for right now. And I think that is dangerous, dangerous territory for Putin to be in. So that's my story.
Right. Well, I tell you what I'd like to do is to open it up for some questions.
Yeah.
Before we do that, if we could get maybe a couple of minutes, I might need to hydrate a little bit.
Oh,
and then we'll come back and we'll take questions for a few minutes. If anybody who's live streaming wants to send in a question, we can
yes,
answer those as well. So give us 2 or 3 minutes,
cool.
and we'll be back.
All right.
Who's up? All right.
You want to open it?
Who's got a question?
Got questions.
All right.
I have two.
Two.
Did none of the sanctions scare Putin, and what has to happen for the war to be over?
Putin, basically. I'll let you answer the sanction question. For the war to be over, it's like I said, it's going to have to be about deciding what concessions are he's willing to make, because it's unwinnable. And he also knows that he cannot do this for years and years on end. So there is a time limit, but we're not quite sure what that is at this point. But it is not an indefinite war. It's an indefinite occupation, but it's not going to be an indefinite war.
Yes, the concession or the sanctions do concern him.
Excuse me.
And the longer they're in place, the more they're going to be concerning to him. And if Dr. Stacy is correct about, the internal strife that's going on in Russia, these sanctions will only increase that as life becomes harder and harder for average Russian citizens. So they certainly, in fact, and this is why you see him taking certain actions like Dr. Stacy mentioned about nationalizing certain things to try to shore up that.
Yeah.
But he's not going to present that, right? He's not going to go out there and let anybody see that he's concerned.
No, absolutely not.
But he certainly is. Looks like we got a.
Yeah, from Zoom, you have a question. Do you believe the Ukrainian invasion will end with appeasement of at least some of Russia's demands circa Europe 1939? And if so, what do you expect in the next 5 to 10 years?
I don't. Dr. B, you want to handle this one?
Well, let's just take what Dr. Stacy
sure.
said. Yes, to a certain, depending on how you define appeasement. If Russia is allowed to keep certain territories that were part of Ukraine or surrounding it that it did not have before, and the European Union and NATO say we're fine with that, as long as this happens.
As long as you don't invade
Right.
Lithuania, Estonia.
As long as you promise never again to invade anybody, that's starting to sound familiar, right? But yeah, I think both sides are going to have to give a little bit
Yes.
for this to end where neither feel like they're completely losing
Exactly.
face.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I see that. What does that mean over the next decade? It means continued conflict.
Yes.
Basically.
Read my new book. It's whenever I get it done. It's about the shifting balance of power. I mean, the international community has been shifting for at least the last 10 years. But I mean, you're really starting to see the nationalism, the conflicts coalesce into a less postmodern, liberal world order, and much, much more going back to hegemonic regional blocs. Yeah.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
going to make things a lot more complicated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah.
Yes, back in the back.
Yo.
First, I want to thank Dr. Stacy, Professor Davenport for a wonderful presentation. If I may, I would make a quick, real short comment and then ask my question. Looking at the map that you showed Dr. Stacy earlier, it looks like Putin's plan is really to disconnect Ukraine from the water.
Yes, yes, sir.
That's why he didn't go.
Absolutely.
top.
Yes.
And then just a side comment, in 2015,
Uh-huh.
we made a terrible mistake with the mullahs in Iran. And for the sake of our own security perhaps, and God forbid, I hope we don't make the same mistake again in Vienna. As you guys know, the discussion is going on. These monsters, such as the mullahs in Iran and Putin, if contained for our security, they turn that into a tool to oppress their own people,
Sure.
which is against our Constitution
Is this?
altogether. And as far as my question, according to the UK Defense Journal in 1999-2000, Putin during a meeting with the then Clinton administration asked to join NATO.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people right now says
Mhm.
Putin and NATO, yes, he
Yep.
did ask.
He sure did.
And it's on the record that then President Clinton had no objection, and then later on we told him, well, go away, come back later on.
Yeah.
Did we adopt this is my question, did we adopt a wrong policy then when this KGB monster was little and we waited 22 years so he could become a much more powerful monster to deal with? Because is Western wrong policy with the world monsters in part responsible in what we're seeing in Ukraine?
So what you're,
And Dr. Stacy, everything was perfect. Just one little disagreement that I had with you regarding the regime change. Thank you for bringing that up.
yeah.
But it's not now. It was in 2000 when we missed that opportunity.
In Russia? In Russia, we missed regime change in 2000? Okay, I'll take that. I'm not going to argue with that. I do want to go back to your original statement. So yes, taking the sea is the most important thing, right? There is a reason why this map is not that great for the Baltic Sea region, but there was a reason why NATO forces have been building up in the Baltic Sea region since largely 2010, was to ward off Putin getting closer to Finland, etc. But yeah, absolutely, right? Putin is a long-term thinker, so he's not thinking about the wars of today. He's thinking about the wars of tomorrow. Yes, cyber warfare, digital warfare, all of that good stuff is going to be involved, but you're also in the middle of climate change, global warming. You're going to have places in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, etc., that are uninhabitable, as we know. And so as these, refugees, etc., start coming up, we're going to start having wars again about geopolitical resources. Water access, oil, land resources, things like that. So yeah, Putin has absolutely positioned himself strategically on the Baltic and Black Sea regions. Crimea, that was a huge win for him, certainly. So I'm going to be really careful about the way that I answer the rest of your questions about Western policy. I think that at the time, the Clinton administration probably was, depending on when it was in the Clinton administration, you have, the Congress that was clearly supermajority Republican, right? So that would have been something that certainly irked them at the time. So I would have to go back and research exactly why we were wishy-washy on that. But the premise of your question remains: did we did we make, or do we make, these monsters, quote unquote, by rejecting them from the Western sphere? I don't know. I think that's a hard question to answer. I think yes, in some ways, that the fact that we have not been, or that we have been selective about who our allies are and who they're not specifically, I think that does and has gotten the United States into trouble. We can obviously talk about, arming the Taliban in the 1970s to, fight the Soviets, etc. So we know that we have made many mistakes in the past in terms of Western policy. But by and large, do I think that all of our policies create, and assist these folks? No, I think that a lot of this is, personalistic politics, right? Especially with a Putin. Yeah.
How do you believe China
Oh.
may react?
No, go ahead.
You're
Go
fine,
ahead.
kid.
How do you, sorry,
You're fine.
how do you think China will change its game plan and its actions towards Taiwan, looking at the situation from Russia and Ukraine and what's going on with them right now?
I think right now China is going to be cautious until the outcome of this is known, right? I think China and Russia both have been somewhat surprised by the unity of the West in meeting this the way they have, right? And
Especially after the last 5 years.
and they're not being more contention between, say, like Germany. And some of the other countries there, and say the UK and the US in putting this pressure. Now you still see some divide, right? Germany's not on board with cutting off Russian imports. We talked about the complications of doing that. But I think they've been surprised so far at kind of the unity that's been there. If Russia fails, and I think Dr. Stacey's right, Russia's going to fail if their end objective was to gain Ukraine as a whole.
Right.
If Russia fails, and it's fairly obvious that they failed, I think it will make Taiwan think a little bit longer about what they want to do with Taiwan.
I don't think they changed much. I mean, at this point, we just got a report yesterday that they are still continuing to encroach upon Taiwanese airspace. Taiwan is a much more difficult, even though Ukraine is, the square footage is much, much bigger. Taiwan, and specifically Taipei, is an extremely difficult place to get, especially because there's a strait, the waterways, etc. So it's going to be difficult for China to kind of have the same motivation, right? I'm going to move in 15 days and I'm going to take this. So I think he's correct that China is going to be very cautious, watch this optimistically until the end. But like I said before, in terms of, the Western response to any sort of Chinese aggression on Taiwan, it'll hurt. It's going to hurt Americans just as much as it hurts the Chinese. And then I would have to ask, where were we in Hong Kong? But, bygones with that.
Yeah.
Dr. B.
Yeah, and then we'll come to our internet question. Yeah.
I had a question, I'm a firm believer that in some of these situations you ride with the devil, but assuming that Dr. Stacey's correct and there's regime change in Russia, what does that look like?
Not much different. I think it's just screwing in another oligarch. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that it's democratization. I don't think that it's a democratic transition. I think that you will get this semblance of more democracy out of whatever figurehead comes out, the Communist Party person, right, pushes out. But not a lot. I don't expect a lot to change.
Yeah, I think, going back to the previous question, probably the biggest failure that the West has made at least one of them, has been to integrate Russia with the Western world in the sense that, now, that's a lot, it's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do.
Sure.
But Russia part of the reason why Russia can do this is they still feel like outsiders to the rest of Europe, right? And to the extent that we weren't able to help them, right? Remember when the wall fell down and there was all this optimism, you were going to see this Russian democracy emerge, and you were going to see Russia's economy take off, and all of these, none of that happened,
At all.
right? None of that really happened, and to the extent that the West could do anything to facilitate that and didn't, I think that's one of their failures. What specific things could they have done? I'm not sure. But I think that probably if you went back and looked, we could probably find some things if we'd just done a couple of things slightly different. We might not be in this situation now, right? Yeah. All right, we've got another internet question.
Yeah, actually, I want to say you have 3 comments.
Oh, my.
Oh, goodness.
This is a great presentation, very informative, praising our resident experts.
Oh,
on this
stop.
subject.
Stop it.
There is another question from the live stream audience.
Okay.
And it is, the International Criminal Tribunal
Yep.
has announced an expedited investigation of potential war crimes by Russia. What, if anything, do you think will be the results of their findings?
I want to be as diplomatic about this as humanly possible. When we start pushing for investigations on war crimes for other countries committing them, when's our turn? I think, and that's the line. I think that becomes really dangerous. Do I think anything's going to come of it? Maybe. But I mean, it took Milosevic forever. That took forever. Back in the late 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was young, kind of. I don't know. Please save me from this.
I'm glad you said that part
Yeah.
about, being careful, about how we impose these kinds of things. Let me say 2 things. I would not be surprised if they do an investigation and they find that war crimes were committed.
I think, yeah, duh.
Do I think anything will come of that? Probably not.
It doesn't matter.
Unless there is actual regime change and whoever the new regime is, whoever's in charge of that feels
That's fair.
a need to extricate themselves clearly from Putin and his policies.
Yeah.
I just don't know that you're going to see any impact from even a finding that war crimes were committed.
I think that's totally fair. And I also want to clarify that I'm not prescribing regime change in Russia. I think that if there is a possibility, or if there were ever a possibility, the potential is there now with the youth, the generation coming up, and the boomer, the old Soviet generation, in decline. I don't want to say that I prescribe regime change in Russia. Just think that if there were a possibility, now would be the moment. Next question. Please.
It's illegible on that map, you can't tell where everything is by name.
Sure.
Is the left side of that big bay there, is that where Odessa is?
Yes, right here. Yes, ma'am,
Right
right
Is
here.
there any way that the European and the NATO nations can casually sail their warships in there to visit?
We're,
Minimize the chance of that being overtaken?
do we want
Right now,
to?
we're all worried about handing over jets to be used
Sure.
in the
Sure.
European Air Force
Yeah.
and NATO nations.
Yeah.
But could they not just stop by the port and visit?
I'm sure they could, but again, I think that, depending on the ownership of the waterway, et cetera, that could be a dangerous,
Again,
Understand, he has not seized Odessa yet?
not yet. No, ma'am.
yes, and then we've got one over here too. Go ahead.
So if there was a regime change
Yes,
in
ma'am.
Russia, see, Putin always he always does something to people who oppose him.
Yep.
So was there be any possibilities for a new leader in Russia?
So you would have to depose of Putin, and it would have to be, honestly, a regime change, I think, in this case would not be amicable. Right? I think it's a military coup. I think that it has to happen from within, and at that point, again, you're screwing in the next person.
And I do think, yes, it would probably come from the military, but I think what could push that over the edge into success is if you have some of these Russian oligarchs who are feeling the
Yes,
pain,
I
who are
agree.
like, okay,
Yeah.
we just can't, this is the wrong direction, we gotta.
You lose the
get out of
military and
this,
the
right?
elite, and you're done.
Yeah, and I think that's.
That's all of authoritarian. That's what they have.
Yeah.
Who do we have?
As far as, like NATO, U.S. allies not being physically involved in the war in Ukraine and Russia, is that really the only thing that is stopping Putin at this point from starting a bigger war with everybody else? I mean, he already made the threat of anybody has any involvement in any of this are gonna see consequences. Consequences never historically seen before.
Yeah.
Which to me is, nuclear, in
Right.
my
Yeah.
opinion. But, I mean, what is he where is he drawing the line as far as our involvement? Because we've put ourselves in a lot of,
Yep.
sanctions, a lot of things have been done on our end already. So is the physical part of us not being there in the actual war, is that what he's referring to? Or where do you think that aspect of it is gonna go?
I mean, I think Davenport's kind of correct in that we kind of waiting and watching to see how firm he is on and serious he is about the nuclear option.
I want to talk about something that I think the way you phrased
Yeah.
this was very interesting, and I think is indicative of how we're thinking of this right now, which is what lines is
Yeah.
he drawing, right?
There you go.
It very much still feels as though he's setting the terms for this,
Because
right?
he is.
And at some point, that's going to have to flip, right? If he's constantly setting the terms, then whatever he comes away with is going to be more than what we will want to give, right? How do we get there? Again, I'm not sure.
And I mean, a lot of those things that he's delineating as, acts of war, whatever, I mean, that's Putin feeling froggy, right?
Right,
So that any move that we make could be justifiably a reason to retaliate, right?
And as I said earlier, at some point, the West is going to have to decide, is it time to call his bluff?
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know what that point is, where it comes, or what the situation will be, but I think at some point, we may face that decision.
I mean, a few more hospitals, and I think
Right.
we're probably there.
Yeah. Oh, hold on, we got one in the back.
You mentioned that Russia's younger generations have an effect on it. Do you think the Western younger generations have any output on it?
I mean, not necessarily American. I don't think that a lot of, just from my students, I don't see a whole huge interest in this, unfortunately.
Well, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot from young people in the U.S.,
Right.
maybe not even in several of the Western European countries.
If the if the energy prices get high enough, you could definitely see that.
If the pain starts coming, that can be a different question,
Yeah.
right? So at least at this point, I wouldn't think anything significant would come from young people in the U.S.
Yeah,
trying to
Agree.
to do something here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. It's all on the Russians. They've got to get their
You've been
democracy
waiting,
together.
and I think this will be our last one. So you get the last
Oh,
question.
he's dictating now.
Number one, why isn't somebody taking him out? And
Oh,
number two,
we.
Is it true or is it false news that they're going after the president of Ukraine?
Oh, absolutely. Number two, yes. It has been reported that he has lived through 12 assassination attempts in the last 2 weeks. That was reported just before we got in here. The United States, until the Trump administration killed the Iranian military commander a couple of years ago, the United States has not been in the policy of assassinating folks in terms of regime change since, like the 19s, if we're being generous about it, 70s. It's just not, it's not what we do. And so again, we have to still adhere to the Geneva Convention. We still need to adhere to the values of democracy. So that is a lovely question, my love. But no, we're not, there's no assassination at least on the part of the United States.
And I want to make it clear, we are not advocating for the assassination of the head of the
He
Russian
leaned
state.
in
I just
real
wanna-
close there. I was scary. Yes, we are not, absolutely. Knock on. Yes. You're
One of the oligarchs this last week put $1 million hit on.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Not
All
at all.
right. Well, thank you all for being here. These
Yes,
been
thank you
wonderful
so much,
questions,
guys.
And we appreciate your participation and hope this was very informative.
Yes, thank you, Internet Land, as well. We appreciate you guys.
If you're one of my students, there's a sign-in sheet down at the